Thanks so much for joining us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin here with attorney Erica Wilson. Thanks so much for being with us, Erica. So, of course, one of the things that we've been watching this week, and well, not just this week, but for several weeks, the disqualification hearings against Fani Willis is something that we covered for you for several weeks here on Atlanta News First and Atlanta News First Plus. Well, we are expecting a decision to be made sometime this week on whether Ms. Willis will actually be disqualified in the election interference case involving the former president, Donald Trump. The judge is actually set to make a ruling after listening to arguments on Willis's relationship with the special prosecutor, Nathan Wade. And also we've learned that a Georgia attorney is eyeing the district attorney seat. Willis could be facing Christian Wise Smith in her reelection bid this fall. That is according to a statement to CBS. Willis has already filed for reelection. All right, so Erica, talking about what could happen this week, a decision could be made on whether Ms. Willis could be disqualified and potentially whether Mr. Wade could be disqualified. What do you think is the outlook?
Well, so let me start with Mr. Wade first. I don't believe that he will be disqualified, and here's why. The judge ruled preemptively that any discussions about his qualifications were going to be ruled out. So they didn't even have an opportunity to discuss that. Then the next question is whether or not there was a legitimate conflict of interest. I don't believe that there was, and what I did not hear, there was a lot of banter. It was certainly entertaining to watch these proceedings. But I think where the lawyers for the defendant in this case failed is they did not establish how, even if Fani and Mr. Wade had this relationship, how it impacted their legal rights. There was absolutely no discussion about that. It was, it was like a Trojan horse to send it in for the affair, the illicit affair, but then nothing happened after that. They didn't lay any foundation for how their rights were impacted, and I think they had a missed opportunity to try to capitalize on that, and they kind of got caught up in all of the tempestuous nature of the proceedings and the back and forth, and some things kind of just got lost in translation. So I don't see that the necessary legal elements were met in order to establish that she should be disqualified from the case.
You talk about just kind of the legal elements that would be met. I guess that's really what it comes down to. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the details of this alleged affair and, well, I guess I should say admitted affair, but really what it comes down to is, does it violate the law or not? So what really does the law state with regards to, relationships like this, impropriety? What does it take? What does the judge need to find to actually remove her from the case?
The judge needs to find that their legal rights were directly impacted or adversely impacted by this particular relationship. The mere fact that they may have engaged in an illicit affair, the mere fact that she may have allegedly hired him because he was her boyfriend or her paramour at the particular time does not in and of itself have any impact on this particular case, the way that they are prosecuting it and their legal rights. So what they would have needed to demonstrate is that somehow their relationship impacted them adversely as far as their legal rights were concerned, and that just was not necessarily established, and there were a lot of missed opportunities for that. But I don't think that they could have established that, because I don't see how her personal relationship with someone on that particular case, prosecuting the case, would impact their legal rights. Now, had she had an affair with a potential witness or law enforcement who was investigating the matter, that might be a little different. But the person who is essentially aligned with her interests, which is prosecuting this matter, they did not necessarily demonstrate that there was a conflict with that representation.
Okay, so that's really what it comes down to. Is there a conflict with that representation? Not just was there a relationship, but also doesn't there have to be some financial gain?
Well, in terms of the financial gain, sometimes financial gain can demonstrate of a conflict of interest. But again, even if there were, how does that impact their legal rights? How has that impacted Attorney Willis's ability to prosecute this case? How does that impact Attorney Wade's ability to prosecute this case? Did it directly impact them? Whether or not she paid for the trip to Fiji or wherever it was that they went, I can't necessarily remember, and whether he paid and they paid him back. I don't know that that necessarily has any bearing on their ability or impacted their discretion in prosecuting in this particular matter. So, again, if it were the case, I believe that they would have been able to demonstrate that, and they didn't. They focused primarily really on besmirching District Attorney Willis's reputation more so than they did focusing on how this impacted their clients' legal rights.
In terms of when a decision could be reached, that's just kind of a matter of the judicial process. But we have been learning from our sources it would be happening sometime during this week. Do you have any guesses?
It's hard to tell, when judges give these kind of harbingers of how long it may take for them to render a decision. It's very hard to tell because, again, I can appreciate when a judge takes the time to consider all of the evidence to kind of reflect on what the law is, and usually in these cases kind of glean from their judicial assistants and their law clerks in terms of being able to make sure that whatever ruling that they have is legally sound. He didn't want to be quick to make a judgment in this matter, as soon as the case concluded. And so it could be today, it could be next week. It just will depend upon the process that this judge is going through in order to be able to come up with his ruling.
It is worth noting that this is overlapping with Georgia's presidential primary, which is tomorrow. I wonder if that has any kind of impact whatsoever on, how things may go. I would think that the judge might want to avoid tomorrow in terms of just, making an announcement as for a decision. But in terms of just the fact that this is playing out while there is this presidential primary happening, is there any coincidence there?
Again, in terms of the timing for all of this, I cannot say that any of this is not strategic. But again, what District Attorney Willis has done did take some time, so it wasn't a quick thing to happen. And I think just in terms of how the wheels of justice sometimes slowly churn, it just may end up being happenstance in terms of this, particularly this particular issue that we're facing right now. This is not litigation that she brought forth. This is litigation that was brought forth on behalf of the defendant. So it could be strategic in that route for them to go ahead and file the motion when they did, understanding when it would be heard. I don't know that the primaries or anything like that would have any bearing on the judge's decision. It may have a bearing on whether or not he chooses to publish his ruling tomorrow, or if he will decide to wait until after to see, necessarily if that will have any impact on that.
So I just want to read a couple of the viewer comments because some of the viewers are asking about non-disclosure. So we have one viewer, Chuck555, says they were dating when she hired him, no disclosure at all. Another viewer writes, the conflict is failure to disclose, an ethical violation. Expectation is the judiciary be held to the highest standard, apparently not in Georgia. So people have their various opinions, but in the letter of the law, is there a duty to disclose a relationship like this?
And I believe that it is written somewhere that she did have a duty to disclose. But
Okay.
Again, even if she had a duty to disclose and she failed to disclose, that doesn't necessarily have an impact on the defendant's legal rights. She can be reprimanded, if you will, for the lack of disclosure, but that reprimand might not include, such a severe sanction as to remove her from the case altogether.
Okay, so there's another viewer who writes, if Fani and Nathan wins, that Trump case would be a flawed joke. And so somebody else, Chuck555, keeps writing in and says, exactly, points to that comment. So I guess that's the big question is, well, there are two separate questions. Number one, would it really be viewed as a joke? Say the prosecution goes forward, it is successful. Would there be kind of this, shadow of doubt as to whether, the prosecution was done correctly? And number two, is that something that Judge McAfee can consider when he's trying to decide whether or not to remove Miss Willis?
So, always, and I can't speak for a judge. I'm not a judge, but, my ex-mother-in-law was a sitting judge for quite some time in Fulton County State Court. And so I do understand how their thought process works, and I know that most judges do consider whether or not their decisions will be easily appealable. And I think as far as the defendants are concerned, whether or not they win or not, I won't say it's inconsequential, but I think it definitely would assist in bolstering any appeals that they would have in the event that she is, not removed. Because certainly if she is removed and it is, moved to a different county, there are a lot of different options that can happen. Whoever the new district attorney is or whoever assumes the responsibility for prosecuting this case could make the decision to throw it out altogether. They could add charges, they could dismiss charges, or they could dismiss the case altogether. But if she is not removed and it continues in Fulton County, I think certainly the lawyers for the defendants would have their appeal will be bolstered by the decision that will be made by this particular judge. And certainly whatever decision he makes, if it's not in their favor, you can anticipate that that decision will be appealed.
And also, I'm just looking, I appreciate that the viewers have a lot of, conversation and questions going on. So Louis O. writes, when is this decision going to take place? AJ writes this week. Thank you, AJ, for responding. That's right. I mean, it's expected to take place this week. We're actually just trying to figure out when exactly this week we would want to prepare for it with our coverage, of course. Our guesses, we were just saying, it sounds like you're just joining us. Probably not going to be tomorrow because of the presidential primary here in Georgia. Maybe later on in the week. Who knows? Is there any other information that you think should have been gathered that wasn't?
Again, I think what was a missed opportunity for the representation for the defendants is for them to directly tie District Attorney Willis's relationship with Attorney Wade to their client's legal rights and how those were directly impacted. I think the focus was primarily on, besmirching, or like you said earlier, just kind of casting doubt on the case and the prosecution and the validity of the prosecution. And certainly, in the court of public opinion, they have been successful in being able to do that. But in terms of a court of law, I don't see where they actually met the required elements under the law to establish that their relationship impacted their client's legal rights.
So I have one viewer that writes in, and by the way, the username is the Nietzschean, which it makes me laugh, but it writes, the issue is whether Fani Willis and Nathan Wade lied under oath and are guilty of perjury. So is that really an issue? Could that become an issue here? Because, obviously the disqualification hearings opened up a whole new can of worms.
So I think what a lot of people need to understand is, irrespective of whether or not the court's decision is nuanced, whether or not they find that there was a conflict of interest, whether or not they find that she failed to disclose, any of those things, all of those things are separate and apart from establishing whether or not there was a conflict of interest that directly impacted the defendant's legal rights. Mm-hmm. And so there are a plethora of reprimands or sanctions that they can receive from the courts. There are a plethora of reprimands and sanctions that they can receive. They're both attorneys from the Georgia Bar, but all of these things are separate and apart and not inextricably linked to the conflict of interest that the defendant's attorneys were trying to establish.
All right. And then, Garland Favorito, this is another viewer, is writing, she was also required under Georgia law to disclose to the county commission her intent to hire special prosecutors when she made her presentation on September 2021. What's your response to that? Would that have any impact?
I hate to sound like a broken record here, but again,
not really.
it really won't necessarily. Not to say that she cannot be punished for that, and there's some sort of reprimand or sanction for that particular violation. But again, I think everybody needs to understand the call of the question is how. Even if she did all of the things that she's being accused of, how did that impact the legal rights? And I don't even think anybody can directly relate the violations or the alleged violations to how it impacted their legal rights. They would have to demonstrate that, and they simply have not been able to do that.
Okay. And so what it sounds like you're saying is essentially the disqualification hearing is not just like a catch-all for anything that she may have done wrong. It's
right.
Specifically, should she stay on this case? But that said, if there were other ethical violations, then there are other repercussions that she could face. We know that, there was a hearing with a Senate committee, for instance, and, an ethics board is looking into some allegations as well. So there are other repercussions that potentially Ms. Willis could face for wrongdoing, but the disqualification hearing is something else.
It's completely separate and apart from these particular violations, unless and until they can demonstrate, which, at this point, the case is closed and it's before the judge to make a decision, and I don't think legally they were able to do that, but unless and until they're able to demonstrate the violation of their legal rights and their constitutional rights in terms of all of these alleged allegations, I don't see her being disqualified from the case. I can't say that definitively she won't receive some sort of punishment otherwise, but I don't see a disqualification from this particular case.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Well, thank you so much for your expertise. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
I'm like the public here. I'm kind of waiting with bated breath. I tell my clients all the time I don't like to predict what a judge will do, because sometimes I'll make a prediction and I could be completely wrong. But I am interested in seeing how this plays out, given I don't feel like there was enough evidence there to disqualify her.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Erica Wilson, for joining us and sharing your analysis. Finally, whenever you come on, people want to know, how do they reach you if they need legal help? So, what kind of cases do you take, and how can people reach you?
They can reach me they can go to www.fairnessfirm.com. We take all types of civil rights cases, personal injury, premise liability, and medical malpractice.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And just a reminder to our viewers, we are going to be covering the decision involving whether Fani Willis will be disqualified from the prosecution of the former President Donald Trump and his allies. And if you haven't yet done so, really encourage you to download our free Atlanta News First mobile news app, because then you're going to get updates sent right to your phone, breaking news updates. As soon as that decision comes down, it'll be sent right to your phone. It's also just a really good app to have, for weather alerts and all that. But AtlantaNewsFirst.com, you can find all the latest as well. All right, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day.